Deaf CEO got rejected at blind date. Single dad janitor signed to her, "You deserve better." You should be grateful that someone normal wants you. The words sliced through Maxwell's restaurant like broken glass. Anita Patrick, Denver's youngest tech CEO, the woman who'd revolutionized accessibility software, stood frozen as her blind date's hand tightened around her wrist. She'd built a company worth millions. She'd changed lives. But in that moment, Bradley Matthews saw only one thing: a disability to exploit. Then a janitor in a worn uniform appeared at their table. His hands moved in the language Bradley couldn't understand, the language Anita had waited her whole life for someone to speak. "You deserve better," he signed. "Someone who sees that your silence speaks louder than most people's noise." What happened next would change 3 lives forever.
Before we continue, please tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. Maxwell's restaurant hummed with the sound of clinking glasses and murmured conversations. Anita had chosen a corner booth deliberately, easier to lip read, harder for people to stare. She'd arrived 15 minutes early, as always, because punctuality was one of the few things she could control. Bradley Matthews arrived 23 minutes late. She noticed his expensive suit first, then the way his eyes scanned the room before landing on her. A quick assessment, a flicker of something she'd learned to recognize: disappointment. Or worse, pity disguised as opportunity. "Anita?" He didn't wait for her response, sliding into the booth across from her. "Sorry I'm late. Crazy day at the firm." She read his lips easily. Years of practice had made her an expert at catching words people threw away carelessly. She pulled out her phone, typing quickly. "No problem. Nice to meet you." He glanced at the screen, then at her, then back at the menu. "So, Catherine tells me you run some kind of tech company."
Anita typed, "I'm the CEO of Preston Communications. We develop accessibility software." "That's nice," Bradley's tone suggested he found it anything but. "Must be challenging, given your situation." The waiter appeared, rescuing them momentarily. Bradley ordered for both of them, without asking what she wanted. Anita's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. This wasn't new. This was the pattern she'd been trying to escape her entire adult life. When the waiter left, Bradley leaned forward with what he probably thought was a charming smile. "Listen, I'm going to be honest with you. My parents have been on my case about settling down, and you seem stable, successful. I think we could have a mutually beneficial arrangement." Anita stared at him, her phone forgotten on the table. "I mean, it's not like you have guys learning up, right?" Bradley continued, oblivious or uncaring. "And I'm willing to look past the whole deaf thing. That's pretty generous, if you think about it."
Something inside Anita cracked. Not broke. She'd been broken before. This was different. This was final proof that her assistant, Catherine, however well-meaning, had no idea what Anita truly needed. She had already wasted too much time with this arrogant man. Bradley's lips had moved for minutes, but Anita had caught only the first few words, what little her lip reading allowed. Past that, nothing. And though he knew she was deaf, he hadn't bothered to take out his phone, hadn't made the smallest effort to bridge the gap. That wasn't ignorance. That was rejection. If he couldn't be bothered to meet her halfway, then staying was nothing but a humiliation. She reached for her purse. Bradley's hand clamped around her wrist. "Where are you going? I'm offering you something here." She tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. A few diners glanced over, then looked away again. The invisible woman's problem wasn't theirs. "You should be grateful someone normal wants you," Bradley hissed, leaning closer. Then a shadow fell across the table. Anita looked up. A man in a janitor's uniform stood there. Preston Communications stitched on his chest. His dark hair was slightly mussed, his gaze steady, carrying not recognition exactly, but something deeper: understanding.
The restaurant noise faded. Anita's world narrowed to those moving hands, clumsy but intentional, speaking the language she'd stopped expecting from strangers.
Bradley released her wrist, looking between them with confusion turning to irritation. "Who the hell are you?" The janitor kept his eyes on Anita, waiting for her response. She signed back, her hands trembling slightly. "I'm okay. Thank you." "You know this guy?" Bradley stood, puffing up his chest. "Listen, buddy, this is a private conversation. Why don't you go clean something?" The janitor finally looked at Bradley. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but firm. "I don't think the lady wants to be here." "The lady can speak for herself." "Oh, wait," Bradley laughed. "Actually, she can't. That's the whole problem, isn't it?" Anita felt the familiar burn of humiliation, but then the janitor's hands moved again, signing slowly so she wouldn't miss a single word. "You deserve better. Someone who sees that your silence speaks louder than most people's noise." Time seemed to stop. These weren't basic signs, hello, goodbye, thank you. These were words chosen with intention, signed with emotion, offered with a respect she'd stopped believing existed. "What's he doing with his hands?" Bradley demanded. "Is this some kind of joke?" Anita stood, gathering her purse. She signed to the janitor, "Thank you for seeing me." Then she walked out of Maxwell's restaurant with her head high, leaving Bradley sputtering about wasted evenings and ungrateful women. The cool Denver air hit her face as she stepped onto the sidewalk. March evening still carried winter's bite. She was fumbling for her car keys when she heard footsteps behind her. "Wait." The janitor emerged from the restaurant, slightly breathless. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have interfered. I saw him grab you and I couldn't." He stopped, then signed, "I'm sorry."
Anita studied him properly now. Early 30s, tired eyes, calloused hands that moved through sign language like someone still learning the alphabet. But he was learning. That's what mattered. She signed back, "Don't apologize. Thank you." "Charles," he said, extending his hand. "Charles Brandon." She shook it, then signed her name, following with fingerspelling, Anita. "I know," Charles signed, smiling slightly. "You're my boss. Well, technically, I'm the night janitor at Preston Communications." Recognition clicked into place. The conference room. 3 nights ago, she'd been practicing a presentation late, signing to an empty room when she'd noticed someone watching through the glass. When their eyes met, he'd signed, "Your words are beautiful." They'd talked for 20 minutes through that glass partition. She'd learned he had a 7-year-old son who'd insisted on learning sign language after meeting a deaf child at the library. He'd learned that she often worked late because chosen solitude felt less lonely than imposed isolation. Neither had shared names. It had felt safer that way, a moment suspended outside their real lives. "I didn't realize it was you," Anita signed, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "I didn't realize you had to deal with—" Charles gestured vaguely toward the restaurant, his face darkening. "That." A laugh escaped Anita's throat, rough, unused. That was actually one of the better dates. Charles's expression shifted to something between horror and sadness. Then his hands moved again. "Coffee? Not a date. Just, I'd like to apologize properly for interfering." Anita hesitated. Every instinct built from 27 years of disappointment screamed at her to say no, to get in her car, to return to the safety of her empty apartment and her 12-hour workdays. But those hands, the careful way he shaped each sign, the effort. She signed, "Okay, just coffee." 20 minutes later, they sat in a corner booth at Brew and Bean, a quiet coffee shop 3 blocks from the restaurant. Charles's hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee he wasn't drinking. His mind was still processing the scene at Maxwell's. The man's casual cruelty, Anita's controlled composure. The moment she'd looked at him with something like hope. He hadn't planned to intervene. Charles Brandon didn't do anything impulsive anymore. Impulsive was arguing with your wife about accepting help from her parents. Impulsive was saying, "We'll discuss this later," instead of, "I love you." Impulsive got you a last memory of anger instead of tenderness. But when he'd seen that man grab Anita's wrist, something in him had broken free of the careful patterns he'd built around his grief. "Why did you learn sign language?" Anita signed across the table, pulling him from his thoughts.
Charles set down his mug, considering how to answer. The truth felt too heavy for coffee with a stranger. But she wasn't really a stranger, was she? She was the woman who'd signed back to him through conference room glass at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. She was the woman who'd admitted that loneliness felt different when you chose it. His hands moved slowly, buying time as much as communicating. My son, William, he's 7. About a year ago, we were at the library, and he met a little girl, maybe 5 years old, who was deaf. She was crying because the other kids wouldn't play with her. Charles paused, remembering William's small face twisted with confusion and determination. William came home that day and announced we were learning sign language. Not asked, announced. Said if nobody else would talk to her, he would. Anita's expression softened. She signed, "Smart kid." Charles signed back, "Stubborn kid," but he was smiling. He checked out every book on ASL the library had, made me practice with him every night. His hand stilled. I think he needed a project, something to focus on besides missing his mom.
The words came out before Charles could stop them. He watched Anita's face, waiting for the inevitable pity or the awkward subject change. Instead, she signed simply, "How long?" 2 years. March 7th. Charles's throat tightened. Routine surgery, allergic reaction to anesthesia. The doctor said it was rare, 1 in 10,000. Like that made it better. Anita reached across the table, not touching him, but close enough that he could feel the warmth of her hand near his. She didn't sign anything. Sometimes silence said more. After a moment, Charles continued. William was 5. He stopped talking for 3 months, just silent. The therapist said it was his way of processing. When he finally started speaking again, he was different, afraid of everything, afraid I'd disappear too. And now, Anita signed. Now he talks nonstop, but he still won't sleep in his own room, still panics if I'm late picking him up from school, still... Sorry, you didn't sign up for my life story. Anita's hands moved firmly. Yes, I did, when I said coffee. Something in Charles's chest loosened, a tightness he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it was there. Your turn, he signed. Why were you on a blind date with someone like that? Anita's laugh had no sound, but she could see it in the way her shoulders shook. She pulled out her phone, typing quickly before showing him the screen. My assistant Catherine thinks I work too much. She's not wrong, but her solution was setting me up with nice guys from good families. Bradley was number 5. They were all like that? Charles incredulous. In different ways, Anita typed. Some pitied me, some fetishized the overcoming disability narrative. One spent the entire dinner speaking to the waiter because he assumed I couldn't lip read. None of them saw me. They saw what I couldn't do. Charles watched her type, noting the rapid-fire way her fingers moved across the screen. Efficient, practiced, resigned. What do you want them to see? He signed. Anita looked up from her phone, eyes wide. Her hands moved slowly, as if testing the weight of each sign. I want someone to enter my world instead of asking me to live entirely in theirs. My parents never did. They learned basic signs, I love you, good morning, be careful, but never enough for real conversation. Never what scares you or what do you dream about. She paused, then continued. By the time I was 10, I stopped expecting it. I built Preston Communications partly because I wanted to help people like me, but mostly because work doesn't disappoint you. Code doesn't pretend to understand when it doesn't. Success is measurable. Relationships... She trailed off, hands dropping to her lap. Charles leaned forward. Relationships are terrifying. Anita nodded, meeting his eyes. But maybe, Charles signed carefully, maybe some of us are worth the fear. Across the table, Anita watched Charles' face as he signed about his son. She recognized something in his expression. The careful way he held himself together, like a building after an earthquake, still standing but cracked deep in the foundation. She knew about cracked foundations. Anita's first memory was her mother crying. She must have been 3, maybe 4, too young to understand the diagnosis, but old enough to understand that something was wrong with her, something that made Mama's face crumple and Dad's jaw tighten. Deaf. Profound, bilateral, sensorineural hearing loss. The doctors had been kind but clinical.
Her parents had been devastated, and Anita, little Anita, who didn't know yet that she was supposed to be broken, had just wanted to know why everyone kept looking at her like that. They learned sign language, her parents. Basic signs, survival signs. I love you. Fisted chest, 2 fingers pointed out, thumb extended. Be careful, K hands stacked. What do you want for dinner? W hand to mouth. But never, tell me about your day. Never, what made you laugh? Never, what keeps you up at night?
By age 8, Anita stopped trying to share her inner world. By 10, she learned that most people would never meet her where she was. They wanted her to come to them, to lip read, to speak, even though her voice sounded strange to her own hands-on throat, to make them comfortable with her difference. School was a battlefield of benevolent neglect. Teachers who spoke to her slowly and loudly, as if volume could penetrate silence. Classmates who either avoided her or treated her like a pet project. Look how nice I am, befriending the deaf girl. So Anita built walls and called them ambition. She threw herself into computer science, where communication was code and code was universal. She graduated MIT at 21, started Preston Communications at 23, and became Denver's youngest tech CEO at 25. Her accessibility software changed lives. Deaf students could attend mainstream classes with real-time captioning. Deaf employees could participate fully in video conferences. Her company's apps were on 3 million devices worldwide. But Anita Patrick, revolutionary CEO, still ate dinner alone most nights, still worked until midnight because empty offices felt less lonely than empty apartments, still jumped slightly when Catherine, her hearing assistant who'd learned ASL to work with her, suggested maybe, just maybe, Anita should try dating again.
What's the point? Anita had signed. Every relationship is the same movie with different actors. Maybe you're watching the wrong genre, Catherine had signed back, grinning. Let me set you up with Bradley. He's a lawyer, smart, successful, comes from a good family. Anita should have known better, should have recognized that comes from a good family was code for we'll see you as a project. But she'd been tired. Tired of her own company. Tired of wondering if this was all there was, professional success and personal loneliness. So she'd said yes to coffee with Bradley, which became dinner, which became tonight's disaster at Maxwell's. Now, sitting across from Charles Brandon, night janitor, widower, father of a 7-year-old who'd learned sign language for a crying girl at the library, Anita felt something she hadn't felt in years. Possibility. Not hope. Hope was dangerous. But possibility? Possibility was the space between one breath and the next, the moment before you decided whether to step forward or back. "Can I ask you something?" Anita signed. Charles nodded. "Why are you really here, having coffee with your boss at 9 p.m. on a Friday night?" Charles's hands stilled. He looked down at his coffee mug, then back at her, his expression unguarded in a way that made Anita's chest ache. "Because," he signed slowly, "you're the first person in 2 years who's made me feel like maybe I'm not invisible." Anita's breath caught.
And because, Charles continued, my son talks about that conference from conversation like it was magic. He asked me 3 times this week if I'd seen the signing lady again. When I saw you at the restaurant tonight, he paused. I couldn't walk away. Your son sounds wonderful, Anita signed. He is. He's also terrified of everything, barely sleeps, and has panic attacks when I'm 5 minutes late picking him up from school. Charles's hands moved with brutal honesty, but he's the reason I get up at 4:30 a.m., the reason I'm learning to code during my breaks instead of sleeping, the reason I haven't given up completely. Learning to code? Anita signed, interested. Charles laughed, sharp, self-deprecating. Trying to. There's a difference. I watch YouTube tutorials during my lunch break. Think maybe someday I can be more than a janitor. Give William something better. There's nothing wrong with being a janitor, Anita signed, firmly. I know, but there's also nothing wrong with wanting more. They sat in silence for a moment. 2 people who'd learned to survive their wounds sitting in a coffee shop at 9:30 p.m., testing the waters of connection. Finally, Anita signed, My son would like to meet you. Charles's face went carefully blank. Your son? No, sorry. I mean, My son, William, your William. He would like to meet you. The signing lady. She was flustered now, signing rapidly. What I meant was... Charles was laughing silently, his shoulders shaking. I understood. Sorry, the look on your face. Anita felt heat flood her cheeks. She typed on her phone, "Smooth, Anita. Very smooth."
Saturday? Charles signed when he'd recovered. Coffee again. William would love it. Fair warning, he'll talk your ear off. He paused, wincing. Sorry, that was... It's fine, Anita signed, smiling. And yes, Saturday sounds good. They exchanged numbers before leaving the coffee shop. As Anita drove home through dark Denver streets, she caught herself humming, not a sound she could hear, but a vibration she could feel in her chest. Possibility, she thought. Just possibility. But possibly that was enough. If you've ever taken a chance on someone unexpected, you know what's coming next. Stay with us. William Brandon had been vibrating with excitement since 6 a.m. Charles had woken to find his son already dressed, hair combed, badly but combed, sitting on the edge of his bed with his ASL practice book. Is it time yet? William signed, his small hands clumsy but determined. It's 6:15, Charles signed back. We're not meeting Anita until 10. That's 4 hours, William signed, exasperated. We should leave now. To sit outside a coffee shop for 3.5 hours? Yes! Charles had laughed despite himself. This was the most animated William had been since Margaret's death. Last night, after Charles had told him about meeting the signing lady at a restaurant, William had peppered him with questions until midnight. What did she look like? How fast could she sign? Did she like kids? Could she teach him more signs? The question Charles hadn't answered, was this a date? Because he didn't know. Coffee with your boss who happened to be the woman you'd intervened for at a disastrous blind date, fell into some gray area between professional courtesy and personal interest. But watching William's face light up made Charles think maybe the category didn't matter as much as the connection. They arrived at Brew and Bean at 9:47. Anita was already there, sitting at the same corner booth, 2 coffees on the table. When she saw William, her face transformed. William froze in the doorway, suddenly shy. All his early morning bravado evaporated. He pressed himself against Charles's leg. Anita stood, moving slowly so as not to startle him. Her hands moved in simple, clear signs. "Hello, William. Your dad says you're learning sign language." William peeked out from behind Charles's leg. His small hands moved hesitantly. "Hello. I'm learning. I'm not very good yet." "You're very good," Anita signed. "Better than lots of adults I know." William emerged fully, emboldened. "Really? Really? Can I show you something?" She sat back down, patting the seat beside her. William looked up at Charles, who nodded encouragingly. The boy climbed into the booth next to Anita, his eyes wide. Anita pulled out her phone and opened an app, one of Preston Communications' products. "This app teaches sign language through games. Want to try?" For the next 40 minutes, Charles watched his son and Anita bent over the phone screen, William's laughter mixing with Anita's silent smile. She was patient, in a way that made Charles's throat tight, correcting William's signs gently, praising his progress, never talking down to him. At one point, William signed something too fast for Charles to catch. Anita signed back and William's face crumpled. "What's wrong?" Charles signed quickly, moving closer. William's hands were shaking as he signed, "I asked if she knew my mom. If Mom could see me learning signs." Charles felt the familiar punch of grief, but Anita responded before he could. "I didn't know your mom," Anita signed to William. "But I think if she's watching, she's very proud. You were learning a whole new language because you wanted to help someone. That's amazing." "Sometimes I dream about her," William signed, tears streaming down his face now. "And in the dreams, she can't talk. Only sign. So I can't understand her. And she gets so sad." Anita pulled William into a hug, slow, asking permission first, then firm when he collapsed against her. Charles watched his son cry into a stranger's shoulder, something he hadn't done since the funeral. When William finally pulled back, Anita signed, "Maybe in your next dream, you'll be able to understand her, because you're learning, and maybe she's learning too."
William nodded, wiping his eyes. "Can I tell you a secret?" Anita signed. William nodded again. "Sometimes I dream about my parents learning sign language, really learning, not just the basics. And in those dreams, We talk about everything. All the things we never talked about when I was awake. Do they come true? William signed. The dreams? Not yet, Anita signed honestly, but I haven't given up. William considered this. Then, will you teach me more science so if I dream about Mom again, I can understand? Yes, Anita signed. Every Saturday, if you want. Every Saturday, William agreed, his face lighting up again. That night, after William had finally fallen asleep, in his own bed for the first time in 3 months, Charles sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open. The coding tutorial played on mute, subtitles scrolling across the screen, but Charles wasn't watching. He was thinking about the way Anita had held William while he cried, the way she'd signed about dreams with such gentle honesty, the way she'd promised every Saturday like it was the easiest promise in the world. Margaret had been William's whole world. When she died, that world had collapsed into something smaller, tighter, safer. Father and son circling each other in patterns meant to prevent more loss. But today, watching William laugh with Anita, Charles had seen a glimpse of something he'd thought was gone forever. His son opening up to possibility. And if William could do it?
Charles pulled out his phone, typing carefully. "Thank you for today. William hasn't smiled like that in a long time." Anita's response came quickly. "Thank you for letting me meet him. He's wonderful." Charles hesitated, then typed, "He asked if you'd come to dinner next week, Tuesday. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and teaching me code. He seems to think you'd be good at both." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "I'd love to. Fair warning, I'm very good at code and very judgmental about spaghetti." Charles laughed out loud in his dark kitchen. "Noted. Come hungry and prepared to critique." "It's a date," Anita sent back. Then, immediately, "Not a date, a friend date, a teaching date." Charles typed, "How about just dinner?" Just dinner works. Charles set down his phone and looked at the coding tutorial still playing soundlessly. For the first time in 2 years, the 4:30 a.m. wake-up felt less like punishment and more like routine. The apartment felt less like a tomb and more like a home waiting to be filled. He thought about Margaret, really thought about her, not just the guilt and the fight and the ending. He thought about how she'd always said he needed to let people help him, how she'd wanted him to finish school, how she believed he was capable of more. "I'm trying," he whispered to the empty kitchen. "I'm finally trying." Have you ever felt life shift beneath your feet? Keep watching. Tuesday dinners became sacred. William would finish his homework at the kitchen table while Charles cooked, and Anita reviewed his code at the laptop. They'd eat together, spaghetti the first week, tacos the second, increasingly ambitious meals as Charles rediscovered cooking, and then Anita would tutor Charles while William practiced his signs. This particular Tuesday, Charles had attempted chicken parmesan. It was edible, which counted as success. "Your code is getting stronger," Anita signed to Charles over dinner. "Have you thought about applying for a junior developer position?" Charles set down his fork. "I've thought about it, but," Anita prompted. "But William needs stability, a regular schedule. My janitorial shift works because I'm home by 12:30. Development jobs," Charles trailed off. "Have flexible hours," Anita signed, "especially at Preston. I could—" "No," Charles interrupted, signing firmly. "No nepotism. If I get a developer job, it'll be because I earned it." "Stubborn," Anita signed, but she was smiling. "Dad's always stubborn," William chimed in, his signs getting smoother every week. Mom used to say he was impossible. Charles felt the familiar clench in his chest, but it was duller now. Time and William's increasing ability to mention Margaret without breaking down had softened the sharp edges of grief. "Your mom was right," Charles signed to William. "But sometimes being stubborn is good." "Sometimes stubborn is stupid," Anita signed. "Ooh, Anita called you stupid," William signed gleefully. "She called my stubbornness stupid," Charles corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Anita signed, eyebrow raised. Charles threw a wadded napkin at her. She caught it, laughing silently, her whole face lighting up in a way that made Charles forget how to breathe for a moment. William looked between them, signing, "Are you guys going to date?" Charles nearly choked on his water. Anita's face went carefully neutral. "We're friends," Charles signed when he recovered. "Good friends." Mom and Dad were friends first, William signed matter-of-factly. Mom told me they met in college and were friends for a whole year before Dad finally asked her out. That's different, Charles signed weakly. Why? William looked helplessly at Anita, who signed to William, Your dad and I come from very different worlds. He's learning, I'm teaching. She paused, we're figuring it out. But you like each other, William signed. Not a question, an observation. Yes, Anita signed simply. We like each other very much. William nodded, satisfied, and returned to his chicken parmesan. Crisis averted.
But later, after dinner was cleaned up and William was watching a movie in the living room, Anita and Charles stood side by side at the kitchen sink. Charles washed, Anita dried. Sorry about that, Charles signed with soapy hands. He's 7. He doesn't understand. That you're not ready, Anita signed. I know. Charles looked at her, really looked at her. Her hair fell across her face when she dried dishes. At the small scar above her left eyebrow, he'd learned it was from a childhood fall. At the careful way she held herself, always prepared for disappointment. What if it's not about being ready, Charles signed slowly. What if it's about being terrified? Of what, Anita signed. Of this, Charles gestured between them. Of letting someone matter, of William getting attached, and then, he couldn't finish. And then I leave, like his mom did. Margaret didn't choose to leave. No, but the hurt is the same. They stood in silence, the weight of loss sitting between them. I'm terrified too, Anita signed finally, of mattering to someone and having them realize I'm not worth the effort, that the silence is too much, that I'm too much.
Charles reached out, catching her hands mid-sign. You're not too much. You don't know that. I do. Charles kept holding her hands, feeling the calluses from years of signing, the slight tremor of vulnerability. Because I see you. Not the CEO, not the disability, you. The woman who spends her Saturday mornings teaching a 7-year-old about dreams, who critiques my terrible code without making me feel stupid, who makes my son laugh. Anita's eyes filled with tears. Charles, I'm not saying I'm ready for anything, Charles signed quickly. I'm not. But I'm saying, maybe someday, if you're patient, if you can wait, will I figure out how to be something other than a widower? Anita pulled her hands free gently, signing. I've been waiting my whole life for someone to see me. I can wait a little longer. From the living room, William called out, Dad, Anita, the good part is starting. They looked at each other, a moment suspended between what was and what could be. Then Anita smiled and signed, We should probably... Yeah, Charles signed, but neither of them moved immediately. Finally, Anita walked toward the living room. Charles followed, watching the way she ruffled William's hair before sitting on the couch. His son immediately leaned against her, comfortable in a way that made Charles's heart ache and soar simultaneously. This was dangerous, this feeling of rightness, this sense that his carefully constructed survival routine was shifting into something that felt almost like living. But as he sat down on William's other side, his son between him and Anita, like a bridge between two islands, Charles thought maybe, just maybe, dangerous wasn't always bad.
Charles submitted his application for junior developer at Preston Communications on a Tuesday morning, right before his janitorial shift ended. He'd been working on his portfolio for 6 weeks, sample projects, cleaned up code, a letter of recommendation from his online instructor. He told himself it was practice, that he wouldn't actually get an interview, that even thinking about it was setting himself up for disappointment. 3 days later, Catherine, Anita's assistant, found him emptying trash bins on the 3rd floor. Charles Brandon? She was signing and speaking simultaneously, something she'd started doing after learning he was friends with Anita. That's me, Charles signed back. HR wants to see you, about your developer application. Catherine's expression gave nothing away. Charles's stomach dropped. When? Now, if you're available. I'm in my uniform. They know. Come on. The HR interview was surreal. Charles sat across from Miranda Chen, Director of Human Resources, acutely aware of his janitor's uniform and the slight smell of cleaning solution that probably clung to him. "Your portfolio is impressive," Miranda said, her interpreter signing beside her. "Self-taught?" "Mostly. Online courses, practice during breaks. No formal degree. I was working on one, computer science, had to drop out when my wife died."
Miranda's expression softened. "I'm sorry for your loss." Then, more businesslike. "The position is full-time, 9 to 5, with flexibility for remote work twice a week. Starting salary is $65,000. Health benefits, 401k match, the standard package." She paused. "There's one concern." Charles's hands tightened on his lap. "What's that?" "Your current position. If you accept the developer role, you'd be working alongside people who currently see you as the janitorial staff. That can be complicated." "I can handle complicated things," Charles signed. "Can you handle it if they don't take you seriously? If they dismiss your ideas because they remember you cleaning their offices?" Charles thought about Maxwell's restaurant, about Bradley's sneer when he'd seen the janitor's uniform, about the way people's eyes slid past him in the hallways of this very building. "I've handled worse," Charles signed, "and the people whose opinions matter will judge me by my code, not my history." Miranda smiled. "When can you start?" Charles went straight to Anita's office after the interview, his hands shaking slightly as he knocked on her open door. She looked up from her computer and her face immediately creased with concern. "What's wrong?" she signed. "They offered me the position, junior developer. I start Monday."
"They offered me the position," Charles signed. "Junior developer. I start Monday." Anita's expression transformed from concern to joy, so pure it made Charles's chest ache. She stood, moving around her desk, signing rapidly. "That's amazing! I knew you could do it! William will be so proud!" "I haven't accepted yet," Charles signed. "Why not?" "Because everyone will think I got it because of you. Because we're whatever we are." "We're friends," Anita signed firmly. "And you got it because your code is good. Because you worked hard. Because you earned it." "But they'll say." "Let them say." Anita's signs were sharp now, almost angry. "You've been cleaning their offices while teaching yourself to code. You've been raising your son alone while building a portfolio. You've done the work, Charles. Don't let your pride or your fear of what people think take this from you." Charles stared at her. "You sound like Margaret." Then Margaret was smart. She was. Charles's hands moved slowly, remembering. She used to say, "I'd rather drown with dignity than accept help with humility." "Were you drowning?" Anita signed gently. Charles looked away, then back. "Yes, for 2 years. Until a Saturday morning in a coffee shop with a 7-year-old who wouldn't shut up and a woman who made him laugh."
Anita's eyes filled. "Take the job, Charles. What if I fail? What if you succeed?" They stood in her office, the city of Denver spread out in the windows behind them, and Charles felt the same shift he'd felt at Maxwell's restaurant, the moment when staying safe became more terrifying than taking a risk. "Okay," Charles signed. "I'll take it." Anita's smile was brilliant. "Good. Now get out of my office. You have a son to tell and a terrible janitor's uniform to retire." Charles laughed, turning to leave, but Anita's hand on his arm stopped him. "Charles," she signed when he looked back, "I'm proud of you." The words hit him harder than they should have. He nodded, not trusting himself to sign anything else, and left before she could see how close he was to falling apart. Charles's first month as a junior developer was brutal. Miranda had been right. Some people couldn't see past the janitor's uniform, even when he wasn't wearing it anymore. They dismissed his suggestions in meetings. They helpfully explained basic concepts he already understood. One senior developer actually asked him to fetch coffee during a code review. Charles had gotten the coffee, and then he debugged the senior developer's code in half the time it took the original programmer. After that, things slowly shifted.
It helped that his code was good. It helped that he was willing to work late and ask questions and admit when he didn't know something. But mostly, it helped that Anita had his back. Not overtly, not in a way that suggested favoritism, but in small moments. Mentioning his insights in leadership meetings, assigning him to high-visibility projects, making sure people knew he'd earned his place. William had adjusted to the new schedule better than Charles expected. Charles worked 9 to 5 now, which meant he was home for dinner every night, could help with homework, could be present in ways he hadn't been able to before. The after-school program William attended was actually good for him. Structured activities, other kids, a routine that felt less like survival and more like childhood. And Tuesday dinners continued. Sometimes at Charles's apartment, sometimes at Anita's penthouse, which had made William's eyes nearly pop out of his head the first time they visited. Always the three of them, Charles cooking, Anita reviewing code or helping with homework, William chattering about his day in a mix of signs and speech. They were building something, Charles realized. Not a relationship, not exactly, not yet, but something more than friendship. A foundation, maybe, a framework for what could be.
Anita knew the board meeting would be difficult. Preston Communications had grown faster than anticipated, and with growth came scrutiny. The board wanted answers about leadership, about delegation, about whether a 27-year-old CEO, deaf CEO, they never said it but she could read it in their body language, could handle the pressure. She'd prepared thoroughly. Charts, projections, testimonials from major clients. She'd even arranged for Catherine to interpret, knowing some board members still couldn't sign fluently despite years of working with her. The meeting started well enough. Revenue was up. Client satisfaction was at an all-time high. Her new accessibility features had won industry awards. Then Gerald Hutchins, the oldest board member, leaned forward. "Ms. Patrick, no one doubts your technical brilliance, but we're concerned about your ability to lead as the company scales." "What concerns specifically?" Anita signed, Catherine voicing. "Communication challenges in high-stakes negotiations, the time you spend on accommodations that could be spent on strategy, whether clients and investors take you seriously given your limitations." The word hung in the air like a grenade. Anita felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the feeling that no matter how much she accomplished, she'd always be defending her right to exist in spaces that didn't want to make room for her.
"My limitations," Catherine voiced, as Anita signed with controlled precision, "haven't prevented me from building this company from nothing. Haven't prevented us from securing $50 million in funding. Haven't prevented our software from being on 3 million devices worldwide. So perhaps the question isn't whether I can lead, but whether this board can adapt to leadership that doesn't look like what you're used to." Gerald's face hardened. "That kind of attitude is exactly what built this company," a voice interrupted. Everyone turned. Charles stood in the doorway. He shouldn't have been there. This was a closed meeting, but Catherine must have texted him, because there he was, in his button-down and slacks, looking every inch the developer he'd become. "Mr. Brandon," Gerald said coldly, "this is a private meeting. I know, and I'll leave in a minute. But first," Charles pulled out his phone, connecting it to the conference room screen, "I want to show you something." A video began playing. User testimonials. A deaf student explaining how Preston's real-time captioning software let her participate in class discussions for the first time. A deaf executive describing how the video conferencing features allowed him to lead meetings confidently. A mother signing tearfully about her deaf daughter finally being able to communicate with her hearing family.
"These people," Charles said, his voice steady, "don't care about Miss Patrick's limitations. They care that she saw a problem no one else was solving and built a solution. They care that she understands their needs because she lives them. They care that Preston Communications exists because Anita Patrick refused to let people like you define what she could accomplish." "Who are you to speak here?" another board member demanded. "I'm nobody," Charles said simply. 6 months ago, I was the janitor cleaning your offices. Now, I'm a developer. That transition happened because Miss Patrick saw potential where others saw a uniform, because she builds systems that give people chances they wouldn't get elsewhere, because she leads with empathy and excellence." He looked at Anita, something passing between them that made her throat tighten. So if your concern is whether she can lead, look at this company. Look at what she's built. Look at the lives she's changed. And then ask yourself if the limitation is hers or yours. Charles left before anyone could respond. The meeting continued, but the energy had shifted. By the end, the board had approved Anita's expansion plans with minimal pushback. Anita found Charles in the stairwell 20 minutes later. He was sitting on the steps, head in his hands. She sat beside him, not touching, just present. Finally, Charles looked up and signed, "I probably just got myself fired. I probably just saved my company," Anita signed back.
You probably just saved my company, Anita signed back. I shouldn't have interfered. It wasn't my place. It was exactly your place. You're part of this company, part of— Anita's hands hesitated. Part of my life. Charles turned to face her fully. In the fluorescent stairwell lighting, he could see the exhaustion on her face, the weight she carried as CEO, as a deaf woman in a hearing world, and as someone who'd been defending her right to exist in spaces like that conference room her entire life. I'm tired of watching you fight alone, Charles signed. I've always fought alone. I know, but you don't have to anymore. Anita's eyes filled with tears. Charles— I'm not saying this right, Charles signed, frustrated with the limitations of his still-learning hands. What I mean is, these months with you and William, Tuesday dinners and Saturday mornings and teaching me code, you've become part of our family without even trying. And maybe— He stopped, searching for the right signs. Maybe what? Anita prompted, her hands trembling slightly. Maybe I'm falling in love with you, Charles signed, slowly, deliberately. Not quickly, not recklessly, intentionally. Every Tuesday, every Saturday, every moment you spend with William, I choose to love you more. Anita stared at him, tears streaming down her face now.
I know I'm still grieving, Margaret, Charles continued. I know I'm probably a mess. I know you deserve someone who can give you everything without baggage. But I'm asking, can you be patient? Can you wait while I figure out how to love someone again? Anita's hands moved before she could stop them. I've been falling in love with you too, slowly, like learning a new language. And I don't want someone without baggage. I want you. Messy, grieving, learning to code you. Charles reached out, wiping tears from her face with his thumb. Yeah? Yeah. They sat in the stairwell of Preston Communications, CEO and developer, deaf woman and widowed father, two people who'd learned to survive their wounds and leaned into each other. Their first kiss was soft, tentative, a question, is this okay? An answer, yes. When they pulled apart, Anita signed, what do we tell William?
The elementary school auditorium was packed with parents holding phones aloft, ready to record their children's performances. Charles sat in the third row, Anita beside him, their hands occasionally brushing on the armrest between them. They hadn't told William yet, not officially, but the boy had noticed the way his father smiled more, the way Anita stayed later on Tuesday evenings, the way they sat closer on the couch during movie nights. Tonight was William's school play, a compilation of poems about family. William had been practicing for weeks, and he'd specifically asked Anita to attend. He's nervous, Charles signed to Anita as the lights dimmed. He'll be wonderful, Anita signed back. The play began. Children recited poems about mothers and fathers, about siblings and grandparents, about families of all shapes and sizes. Then William walked onto the stage, small and serious in his button-down shirt. He began signing before speaking, a poem he'd written himself. His hands moved clearly, deliberately, signing, my family is different now. We used to be 3. Now we're 2. Dad and I. Charles felt his throat tighten. William continued, Dad wakes up early. I know he's sad. He makes coffee for Mom, but Mom's not there. The cup sits on the counter getting cold. Anita reached over, squeezing Charles's hand.
But then, William signed, his small face lighting up, we learned a new language, a language where hands speak, and we met someone who understood, someone who taught me that families can grow new branches, that love doesn't replace love, it adds to it. William's hands moved through the final verse. My family is different now. We're not 3. We're not 2. We're becoming something new. And that's okay. That's good. That's how love works. It grows around the spaces that hurt, filling them with something that feels like hope. The audience erupted in applause. Parents who hadn't understood the signs were reading the subtitles projected on the screen behind William. Many were crying. Charles was openly weeping. Anita's face was wet with tears. William bounded off the stage after the performance, running straight to them. He threw his arms around Anita first, then his father, then somehow hugged them both at once. Did you like it? He signed frantically. Was it good? Did I mess up any signs? It was perfect, Anita signed, pulling him close. You're perfect. William pulled back, looking between them with eyes too knowing for 7. So are you guys dating now? For real? Charles and Anita looked at each other, then back at William. Yes, Charles signed. If that's okay with you? Finally, William signed dramatically. I've been waiting forever. It's been 6 months, Charles signed, laughing. That's forever when you're 7, William signed matter-of-factly. Then, more seriously, does this mean Anita can be my mom? The question sucked the air from the auditorium lobby. Other families swirled around them, but Charles, Anita, and William existed in a bubble of held breath. Anita knelt down to William's level, signing slowly, I can't be your mom. You had a mom, and she loved you so much. No one can replace her. William's face fell. But, Anita continued, I can be someone who loves you, someone who shows up, someone who learns your favorite books and teaches you signs and is there for school plays. Would that be okay? William thought about this for a long moment. Then, like a bonus mom? Anita smiled through tears, exactly like a bonus mom. Okay, William signed. I'd like that.
They drove home together, all 3 of them in Charles's aging sedan, William shattering about the play, about his classmates, about whether they could get ice cream to celebrate. Normal things. Family things. At Charles's apartment, William fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from the performance and excitement. Charles and Anita stood in his doorway, watching him sleep. He really wrote that poem himself, Anita signed quietly. Every word. He's been working on it for a month. He's extraordinary. He learned from watching you. They moved to the living room, settling on the couch in the familiar constellation they'd formed over months of Tuesday evenings. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt like a threshold being crossed. I'm terrified, Charles signed. I know. What if I'm not ready? What if I can't? Anita placed her finger on his lips, stopping him. Then signed, what if you are ready? What if we both are? What if being terrified is just part of learning to love again? Charles pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, something floral he could never quite name. I loved Margaret, he signed against her shoulder. I know, she signed back. But I love you too. Differently. Not less, just differently. That's how it should be.
They sat in the quiet of Charles's apartment, holding each other. 2 people who'd learned that hearts could break and heal and break and heal again. That love was always a risk, but sometimes, it was a risk worth taking. Meeting Anita's parents was Charles's idea. She'd resisted at first. Years of disappointment had taught her to keep her romantic life separate from her family. But Charles had insisted. They're your parents, he'd signed. They love you. They just don't know how to show it. They've had 27 years to figure it out. So have you, and you're both still learning. Anita couldn't argue with that. The dinner was at her parents' house in Boulder, a beautiful craftsman home that Anita had grown up in, but never quite felt at home in. Her mother, Patricia, answered the door with a hug and basic signs. Hello, come in. Her father, Robert, shook Charles's hand and spoke loudly, the way people do when they think volume equals comprehension. William saved the evening. Within 10 minutes, he was showing Anita's parents the signs he'd learned, patiently correcting their finger spelling, explaining that no, you couldn't just make up signs, there was actual grammar and structure. Charles watched Anita watch her parents struggle to communicate with William, saw the complicated emotions flickering across her face. Hope, hurt, something like longing. After dinner, while William and Patricia were looking at photo albums in the living room, Charles sat at the kitchen table with Robert and Anita. The older man was attempting small talk, asking about Charles's job, about William's school. Then Charles signed something to Anita, a comment on her father's story, and Robert stopped mid-sentence. "You sign," he said, looking between them. "I'm learning," Charles signed back, speaking simultaneously. William insisted. He wanted to communicate with a deaf child at the library. "And you just learned?" It wasn't just, it was months of practice, mistakes, frustration. But William needed it, so I learned.
Robert looked at his daughter, something like understanding dawning on his face. Anita's hands moved quickly, defensive. "It's fine, Dad. I know it's hard." "No," Robert said, and his voice cracked. "It's not fine. I've been telling myself for 27 years that basic signs were enough, that you could lip read, that you'd adapted. But watching this 7-year-old sign circles around me..." He looked at William in the next room. "He put in the effort I should have put in decades ago." "Mr. Patrick, it's never too late to start," Charles signed. "Call me Robert." He looked at Anita, really looked at her. "Teach me. Not the basics, everything. The way you wanted to talk to us when you were 10. Anita's eyes filled with tears. "Dad, I'm sorry I didn't learn sooner. I'm sorry I made you live in my world instead of meeting you in yours." Robert's voice was thick. "But if you're willing to teach me, I'm willing to learn." Patricia had come to the kitchen doorway, William beside her. "We both are," she said quietly, "if it's not too late." Anita signed something, too fast for Charles to catch. Then she stood, walked to her parents, and for the first time in her adult life, she hugged them and felt like maybe, just maybe, they were finally starting to see her.
Charles had been planning the proposal for 2 months. He'd coded a special program, the most complex thing he'd ever attempted, with help from Anita's development team, sworn to secrecy. It was Saturday morning at Brew and Bean, their original meeting place. William was in on the plan, practically vibrating with excitement. "Is it time?" he signed for the 15th time. "Almost," Charles signed back, "when Anita gets here." Anita arrived at 10:03, her usual 3 minutes late, hair still damp from her shower. She slid into the booth, signing, "Sorry, board meeting ran long yesterday. I overslept." "It's okay," Charles signed. "We're just glad you're here." William giggled, earning a suspicious look from Anita. "What's going on?" she signed. "Nothing," both Brandon males signed in unison, which only increased her suspicion. Charles pulled out his laptop, opening it to a blank screen. "Remember when you asked me what I was coding during our sessions? The project I wouldn't let you see?" "You said it was a surprise," Anita signed. "It was. It is." Charles turned the laptop toward her. "William, hit the lights." The coffee shop staff, also in on the plan, dimmed the overhead lights. Charles pressed enter, and the screen came to life.
The program mapped heartbeats into visual patterns, concentric circles of light that pulsed in time with recorded audio. William's voice played through the speakers. "Anita, will you marry us?" As his voice spoke, the light pattern synchronized with his heartbeat, creating a visual representation of the question. Then, Charles's hands moved in sign, repeating the same words. "Will you marry us?" The program continued, showing 3 heartbeats side by side. Charles's, William's, and a space for a third. As Anita watched, tears streaming down her face, the 3rd heartbeat space began to glow, pulsing in sync with the other 2. "We're not complete without you," Charles signed. "You taught me how to live again. You taught William that families can grow around hurt. You taught us both that love doesn't need sound. It just needs presence." He pulled out a ring, simple, elegant, with 3 small stones. "This isn't replacing Margaret. This is honoring what we're building. The 3 of us, a family." William signed, Please say yes. I already told my friends you were going to be my bonus mom." Anita laughed and cried simultaneously. Her hands shook as she signed, "Yes, yes to both of you. Yes to all of this." Charles slipped the ring onto her finger as the coffee shop erupted in applause. The staff, the early morning regulars, all of them celebrating these three people who'd found each other in the spaces between grief and hope. William threw his arms around both of them, and for the first time in 2 years, Charles felt complete.
They chose the botanical garden for the ceremony, the place where Charles and Anita had first talked about Margaret, where he'd admitted he was learning to live again. It was a small wedding. William served as ring-bearer and interpreter, signing the ceremony for deaf guests while speaking for hearing guests. Anita's parents sat in the front row, their signs still slow but improving. They'd been taking lessons weekly, really trying. Charles's parents had flown in from Oregon, his mother crying before the ceremony even started. Margaret's parents were there too, initially hesitant, but won over when they saw how happy William was, how he'd bloomed under Anita's care. Catherine officiated, signing and speaking simultaneously. When it came time for vows, Charles stood before Anita in his best suit, hands steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. He spoke aloud while signing. "When I met you, I had forgotten how to hope. I was surviving, not living, counting days, not making them count. You entered my life at my lowest moment, standing in a restaurant in my janitor's uniform, watching a stranger hurt you. And somehow you saw past all of it to something worth knowing."
Anita's eyes shimmered with tears. "You taught me that broken hearts can grow back stronger," Charles continued, "that families are built on understanding, not blood, that love doesn't need to sound loud. You gave William his laugh back. You gave me my future back, and all you asked in return was that I keep showing up." His voice cracked. "So I'm vowing to keep showing up. Every Tuesday, every Saturday, every moment you'll have me. I'm vowing to learn your language, not just ASL, but the language of who you are, your dreams, your fears, your hopes. I'm vowing to enter your world instead of asking you to live only in mine." He signed the final words, "I love you, not despite your silence, because of the beautiful noise you make in it." There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. Anita spoke her vows aloud, her voice strong and clear, the voice she rarely used because people made her feel it wasn't good enough. "Charles Brandon, you're the first person who ever looked at me and saw a woman instead of a disability. You learned my language not because you had to, but because you wanted to know me, really know me. You let me love your son without trying to make me replace his mother. You saw my success without being threatened by it. You gave me the one thing I never thought I'd have, a family where I don't have to translate myself to be understood." She signed as she spoke the final words, "I vow to love William like he's mine, while honoring that he was Margaret's first. I vow to show up for both of you in the hard moments, not just the easy ones. I vow to keep teaching you signs, keep reviewing your code, keep eating your experimental dinners even when they're terrible." Charles laughed through tears. "And I vow," Anita finished, "to remind you every day that you're not invisible, that you matter, that you're seen." They exchanged rings. Catherine pronounced them married, and when Charles kissed his wife, the garden erupted in applause and signs, a mixture of sound and silence that somehow made perfect sense. 5 years later, the Preston Communications holiday party was in full swing. Charles, now lead developer of accessibility innovation, stood near the windows, watching William, 12 years old now, confident and kind, present his science project to a group of executives. The project was a communication device for deaf-blind individuals, something William had been working on for months with Charles's coding help and Anita's hardware expertise. He presented in both sign and speech, moving between languages as naturally as breathing. On Charles's hip, 4-year-old Lucy squirmed, signing, "Daddy, down." Charles set her down, watching as she toddled toward Anita. Their daughter had been born profoundly deaf, like her mother, and the diagnosis had terrified Charles for about 10 seconds until Anita had signed firmly, "She's perfect, and she'll never feel alone in her silence, because we're here."
Lucy had been signing since before she could walk, chattering in ASL with the fluency of a native speaker. Anita caught Lucy, lifting her up and signing, "What are you doing over here, little bug?" "Wanted Mama," Lucy signed. "I'm right here," Anita signed back, kissing her daughter's forehead. Charles joined them, sliding an arm around Anita's waist. "Remember when you were the CEO who thought she'd always be alone? Remember when you were the janitor who barely knew the alphabet in sign?" Anita countered. "Look at us now," Charles signed. "Look at us now," Anita agreed. Across the room, William caught their eyes and signed, "Love you." Charles and Anita signed back in unison, "Love you too." They'd healed each other not through dramatic gestures, but through patient presence. Tuesday dinners and Saturday mornings, code reviews and bedtime stories, small moments that built into a life.
Charles had learned to live again, to dream beyond survival. Anita had learned to trust, to let herself be fully seen and loved. William had learned that families could grow around grief, that love didn't replace love, it added to it. And Lucy was growing up in a world where sign language was her first language, where silence was just another way of being loud, where love needed no translation. Their story wasn't about fixing broken people. It was about two wounded souls who chose to grow toward each other, filling the empty spaces with understanding, patience, and intentional love. In their silence and their speech, they'd built something beautiful. A family where everyone's voice was heard, where love needed no translation, where broken became whole, not through erasure, but through addition. Charles looked at his wife, the woman who'd been rejected at a blind date, the woman he'd seen across a restaurant and couldn't walk away from, and signed, "Thank you." "For what?" Anita signed back. "For seeing me when I was invisible." "Thank you," Anita signed, "for speaking my language."
They stood together in the warmth of the holiday party, surrounded by the family they'd built and the life they'd chosen. Two people who'd learned that the best love stories aren't about perfect timing or dramatic rescues. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to Soul Lift Stories and hit that notification bell. Share this with someone who needs to hear that broken things can become beautiful, that love finds us in unexpected places, that we're all worth the effort it takes to truly see each other. Leave a comment telling us, have you ever felt invisible? Have you ever had someone see you when no one else did? Your story matters. Thank you for watching. See you in the next story.